Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Laura. Welcome to Where Work Meets Life. Today, we have a very important and exciting episode on vitamin N. You may ask, what is vitamin N? It's the power of nature in work-life wellness. And I have two guests here with me today. I'm going to start by introducing Laura Cohen. Laura is originally from Montreal, but she's now based in Halifax and lives a 10-minute walk from the beautiful ocean. For the last 6 years, she's worked as a counselor in universities, employee assistance programs, and private practice, including her own nature therapy practice, as well as works with my company, Canada Career Counselling, which is now coast to coast. So that's very exciting. Laura has a master's degree in counseling psychology from McGill University and a Bachelor of Arts in Communications with a minor in psychology from Concordia University. And she's become very passionate speaking, writing, and helping clients one-on-one around the health benefits of nature, which includes individual nature-informed therapy and outdoor group therapeutic services. I could go on, but we're going to save that for her to tell us a little bit more about the power of nature for people's mental and emotional well-being. Philip Vanhoutte is based in Belgium and also spends some of the year in Austin, Texas. Interestingly, Philip was my first podcast guest back in the fall of 2020 when we did an episode on why does it take a pandemic to change the way we work and live. Philip has been a dear friend and mentor for many years. He's had a long and rewarding career in the ITC industry. He's passionate about technology and communications, and he's become especially passionate about accelerating the realization of human potential. He wrote the Smarter Working Manifesto, How to Shape Work Styles in Organizations. He's a huge fan of distributed work, activity-based work, working in healthier, more flexible ways, which is how we originally met. And in his quest for health and joy at work, he became very interested in nature deficit disorder and how a lack of nature in our work lives is resulting in high levels of burnout, work-induced sickness, and a struggling workforce. So we're going to learn more about that today. Philip holds a degree in economics and engineering, as well as marketing, and he's worked across Europe and North America, so has a very global perspective on work and workplace. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I am very excited about this discussion, and I'm going to start off with asking you, Laura Cohen, to tell us a bit more about what led to your interest in incorporating nature into your counseling and therapy practice with clients.
I've always been, an outdoorsy nature person, but it wasn't until I moved to Nova Scotia that I really was able to have more access to nature in my everyday life. It's just a beautiful city. And like you said, I live a 10-minute walk from the ocean. It's the city of lakes. It's just very green, lots of blue space. So it just became part of my lifestyle. And I also just happened to surround myself with lots of friends who just happened to be environmentalists. So I just ended up learning, organically about how to identify trees and how to do backcountry camping and that kind of thing. So it was just part of my personal life. And then when the pandemic hit, it was just the silver lining. It was what kind of got me through those 3 years. And I was the 5th person in Nova Scotia to get COVID-19, actually. I was one of the first people. So it was a really terrifying, scary time. And there was like 1 or 2 weeks where you could go outside and walk if you had COVID-19. It was like right before they implemented the quarantine. So that was one of the things I did. Obviously I didn't interact with people, but there was like a little nook that I went to, and I just realized that it really, uplifted me. And there was just an effect on me that I knew that there was some psychology behind it. And I had heard about ecotherapy, but it was that lived experience that really pushed me to look into getting the training. And so eventually I went to the States, and there's a center in Maryland where I went that was evidence-based, connected to a university, but also that incorporated and that wasn't afraid of the psycho-spiritual parts of nature therapy and having that nature connection. So I ended up getting the training and implementing and incorporating it into my work. And now it's part of my practice now that I know the benefits of it.
And that's what I really admire about you, Laura. You're a very holistic person, really building in the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional sides to your practice. And I think as whole human beings, those are all components that are important in our wellness.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing that and being one of the first few having COVID in that province. I mean, that's pretty, intense at the time, I'm sure. But here you are today. And again, it's so good to work and collaborate with you, Laura. Now, Philip, tell us what led to your ongoing focus on nature in work and in life.
Well, my nature journey, as I call it, is characterized by some ups and downs. My first work experiences as a young guy basically was working in nature. I did some farm help, and then I basically spent several summers as a postman on a coastal area in Belgium. So I sort of felt working comes with nature. Well, surprise, surprise, as soon as I got to university, nature went dark on me because beyond being a professional DJ, I spent most of my time in classes and also in studying in my student home. I must say that starting to work, the professional career, was not a good experience either, because I had to spend lots of time in noisy, polluting commutes, and then had to work in rather dull offices with chain-smoking colleagues that also didn't give me a lot of daylight. So it got a bit better when I started to live in the UK and worked in Scandinavia, where I got to rediscover, shall we say, the power of nature. And then, of course, in the beginning of this century, we had the smartphones and the mobile internet coming up, and suddenly I could start to work and was released from the office cage. And that started a journey of experimenting in working with and in nature. I'm going to give you some examples. I had the pleasure of yanking my 100 people staff out of ballrooms in hotels, for instance, on the beach of Lake Tahoe. Yeah, I did the same thing in Montreal, where I got all of my team on a very nice boat on the St. Lawrence River. Yeah, and then I decided to give my people in Europe beautiful locations for offices on some of the most famous rivers. For instance, picked up a new office on the Rhine in Cologne, picked up a new office on the Seine in Paris. And then I had a really joyful experience about 10 years ago when I could fully embrace biophilic design in an award-winning office in Amsterdam. And then about 5 years ago, and this goes back to when we met in the US, that was Laura, is when I met Rolando Bailly. We felt that we had jointly a passion for nature at work. And we launched in 2018 at South by Southwest a pursuit to tell people that nature at work is pretty much essential for people to tap into their full potential. So you can see, I would say, a downer sort of mid-career, and then picking it back up, getting really annoyed by being inside all the time, and then leveraging it to the fullest.
Wonderful. What a fantastic story, Philip. Now, on to Laura. I'd like to know about how nature is such an important element of mental wellness. What is a fact or research finding that you find particularly, fascinating or inspiring?
Yeah, there's so many facts. Like, I could just go on for hours talking about the research, but I like to just always talk about, first of all, like setting up the stage in terms of why it's important. And there's a study done last year that showed that 90% of Americans and Canadians aren't far off, but 90% of Americans most Americans spend 90% of their time indoors, and Canadians spend an average of 6 hours a day on their screen. So, we spend way too much time inside. And so there are, negative repercussions to that. And so some of the effects that we've seen over time is there's been like a resurgence of rickets, which is the lack of vitamin D. That's resurged. It was completely eradicated. And now in Great Britain, like in most of the UK, in the States and Canada, it's resurging because of our plugged in tech culture. But another thing that I like to talk about is that there's two studies that I find really interesting in terms of the benefits of nature. And so there's something called the Mappiness Project that was done in 2013. Maybe you've heard of it. So there was like 3 million participants in this one. And Greg McCarran, who ran the study, said that, or was looking at what makes people really happy once income, relationships, and like general safety are controlled for, like what makes people really happy once those are settled. And so he found that people are least happy when at work or sick in bed, which is probably pretty intuitive, and the most happy when they're outside, especially coastal environments. And outside could mean picking up your mail outside. It could be sitting on your porch stoop. It could just be so simple as that. And, you know, me being a 10-minute walk from the ocean and being so close to nature, I think has a lot to do with my quality of life. Like, I really do think that coastal environments, through my own lived experience, is just a happier place to live. Also, there's a famous study when it comes to ADHD and working in nature. It's very effective and very beneficial for people living with ADHD. So there's a lot of research around that particular presenting issue. And so there's a famous study done in 2009 that had children with ADHD who basically the study showed that a 20-minute walk outside rivaled the effects of stimulant medication, which is kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. So that's why things like forest schools and, you know, recreational time outside is just so interesting to look at how beneficial it is. So further research shows that kids with ADHD who have access to green space just have better resilience, better quality of life, and are just have better mental health compared to their peers who don't spend any time in nature. So
I think it's a really important set of points you made, and having Dr. John Rady on the episode a couple of episodes ago, he's one of the foremost ADHD, if not the foremost ADHD expert in the world. And he said the same thing, Laura, that time outdoors and especially physical activity is critical to ADHD and mental wellness. And his book Spark is all about that topic. So, okay, my next question is for Philip. When it comes to designing spaces to live and work, what is biophilic design and how does it improve our well-being?
Biophilic design, originally by Philip Vanhoutte, was identified to relate to 70 aspects, 70. I'm not going to rattle those off, but I found a gentleman, William Browning of the Terrapin Institute, which has done a superb job of identifying 14 patterns of nature that need to be included, ideally, in that biophilic building that you're going to have. So there's 7 of them that have to do with direct presence of nature. So, of course, that's views on nature. Then, of course, there is other sensory experiences that relate to sound, smell, touch, and taste, if you want to go that far. Then there is the, I would say, non-rhythmic stimuli. That is all to do with clouds passing by, leaves and plants moving around. Then there is the direct presence of water. There is also thermal and air variability. You may not realize that, but we love it when there is a variation in temperature and airflow. There is also the enjoyment of natural light. We also call this circadian light, which allows us to energize and to get back into kind of a sleepy circumstance. And then last but not least, we love seasons. Yeah, and therefore the weather systems that give that change no matter where we are is important. So those 7 that have to do with direct experience of nature. And then there's the analogs that we often need when we go inside, because we may not have the luxury of seeing those things directly. And that relates to all kinds of biomorphic forms and patterns that you typically see in furniture, furnishings, and decor. There is material connection, that is material not in nature, but retrieved, hopefully with minimal processing. So think about wood, you think about steel, actually, and also fossils and stone. And then there is the complexity of nature that is often presented in graphical illustrations. And then there is a third category, which has to do with how we experience certain nature relations. And there's 4 of them. One of them has to do with prospect. and it's called the Savannah experience, whereby you're sitting slightly elevated and therefore have an extended view on things that give you perspective on what may be blessing or, I would say, threatening you. The second thing has to do with what we call is refuge, and refuge is that you are protected from what can come from above or from behind. Yeah. Then there is the whole topic of mystery, whereby you don't get to see everything and are very curious to sort of look around the corner, figuratively, because nature invites you to go and discover. And last but not least, there is the kind of play on risk and perils, whereby we all love that kind of infinity view with a nice transparent rail or something like that people want. So those are the kind of 14 things that architects are advised to sample in. This is a science, and I would say that the 30 or so booklet, PDF, free PDF from Terrapin is absolutely fantastic, because for each of these patterns, he actually sums up all of the scientific studies that have proven this stuff. And it's like a cookbook. It's the cookbook for biophilic design. That's what I'm using in my easy spaces that you're going to be visiting in a couple of weeks here in Bruges, Laura. So it's based on that cookbook, Terrapin 14 Patterns.
Wonderful. And we'll include that in the show notes, as well as the blog that will follow this episode. And we want to share as widely as possible the things that organizations need to be aware of when they're redesigning space, upgrading space. I think gone are the days of dark cubicle lens, or should I say bright neon fluorescent light cubicle lens. Right, Philip?
Yes. Well, in fact, if you can work outdoors altogether, that's even better. You don't need to be in a building. I mean, my motto is try and spend half of the time of your work outdoors. And if the weather is inclement or something like that, then go in where you don't have any choice, which is in the building.
Wonderful. And today it's a very rainy day, and we just moved offices. So my office overlooks the Mighty Bow River, it's called. And 10 years ago, the river crested and caused a major disaster in our city. So it's the 10-year anniversary of that today. And I can see the river flowing, but it's nowhere near cresting. So we're good here in Calgary. But looking onto this nature is so inspiring for me. So very, very happy to be here in this office. And I think our home offices too, we can choose to set up in our basement with no natural light, or we can choose to set up by natural light and looking onto nature, etc. If we have that ability, highly recommend it. So Laura, so we've heard from Philip about space and biophilic design. I want to hear how people on an everyday basis can build nature into their work lives to help their mental well-being. So just a couple of recommendations that people can implement immediately would be great.
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of building off of what Philip just mentioned, like biophilic design is something that I often talk about with clients, but just the simple thing of just having, if you can't go outside or work outside, having a picture or a painting of nature in your home office, simple as that, actually has benefits on your mental health. It's actually good for you. Incorporating any kind of natural setting, natural stimuli into your home office or your office, like you said, it could be natural light. It could be moving your desk to a certain angle. It could be having, soundscapes in the background instead of, instrumental music. Maybe turn on the nature soundscape playlist on Spotify or whatever platform you end up using. Like I do that a lot. I just want to feel like I'm outside all the time. So these are things that I've incorporated that I find that help, in having plants and things like that. But also incorporating, daily outside time, like a 10-minute walk, a 45-minute walk if you can in the morning before you start your work. If you work from home, having that like quote unquote fake commute is actually sort of really good to compartmentalize work life from home life. And so having that morning walk and also getting that nature connection can be really helpful for your mental health. And so, yeah, it also helps you tune into your intuition too when you're outside and connecting with nature. I think we're often in overdrive often in overdrive with our executive functioning and overstimulated with lots of sensory information, especially if you live in the city or if you're working in front of a computer. So getting that nature time can actually create more space for introspection and creative thinking, like Philip was saying. So having a daily routine of that nature connection, I think, is incredibly important.
Beautiful. And that's a great segue to when you mentioned creative thinking. That's what I wanted to ask Philip next. So how does nature inspire our creativity and innovation, and how can we better use it to think of new solutions to the many problems that the world is facing today?
Well, that takes me back to 2007, when I was invited to participate in a survey that wanted to understand how I and several others as business leaders were functioning and performing in what kind of settings. Yeah, so it was called a study on work topology for know-how workers and managerial professionals. And we were asked, what are the kind of two most treasured circumstances and moments that you would like to highlight? And there was a consonance that people said, it's all about finding spaces to think, and secondarily, interacting with others. Yeah? And then they work that down by saying that the birth of an idea is most often triggered by clearing the mind, by doing mindless activities such as mowing the grass or staring out the window, by passive inspiration of sights and sounds which are sprouting ideas, but most of all by being uninterrupted, alone with your thoughts, and stimulated by real, not digital, world stimuli, and that is producing creativity. Yeah, that was the first thing. The second thing, they said that when the ensuing deep reflection then takes place, it requires an activity to go against the reactive reptile mind. Yeah? So therefore you need visual backdrops, like a garden or a distant view, and you also need to be at that same time on the move, as in walking or cycling, which are seen to be the key catalysts. Yeah. Now, when I read all that, and it was me feeling the same thing, I said, well, that's very clear now that know-how activities are largely impossible in offices, right? So that really gave me an enormous boost to work on that. They also said in passing that refueling during the workday is as important as before and afterwards, and that it is essential to have nature as the lead contributor to re-energize, refresh, and relax. And then on the topic of interacting with others, they said that joining forces with associates, partners, and also customers is best done in well-chosen, memorable places, which you agree with me is equally hard to find in that concrete jungle. Yeah? And that quality time and engagement is therefore absolutely best beyond the dullness of meeting and conference rooms. Yeah? So that really got me going by saying, gee, this kind of unhappiness that I felt mid-career about being always indoors, about having nature relegated to the weekends and to vacation time does not make any sense anymore. And that was well before I had heard about the word biophilia. That came for me another like 6 years later. And then the science proved it. We all know that biophilic science is not even 40 years old. Yeah. So a lot of people have not heard about it. If I speak about it to executives and I said to them, have you heard about biophilic science? They say, bio what? Well, I said biophilic, biophilip. No, biophilic, can you remember that? And so it's amazing that this is a completely young dimension of human functioning and human organizations for work and life that still has to be broadcasted big time. That's what we're doing at this moment.
Wow, that is, I mean, just so interesting. And I think the whole pandemic was a chance where a lot of people did get to, avoid the daily commute and the daily full time in the concrete jungle. And people are resisting to going back full time as organizations pull more and more people back, saying creativity happens best in an office. And what I'm hearing is, well, not necessarily. Actually, creativity happens best outside the office or with a nature filled experience and having that time away from the clutter, the noise, and the overstimulation. So maybe a blend or a balance of both. If there needs to be some office, don't make it full-time office if you can avoid it.
Well, it's a good point, Laura, because I was just reviewing a sneak peek of Beyond Hybrid Working from Andy Lake. You remember Andy Lake? And he's basically saying that one of the reasons why people want to stay at home is that there is a higher propensity and chance that people have more nature around their homes than they have that in these urban concrete jungles, right? And that the kind of biomimicry that is being done by facilities managers and the big real estate, I would say, firms is a faint aspect of what can be done closer to home.
Yeah, well said. Now let's talk about, again, implementing these ideas from the evidence, from the research. So Laura, how do you practice what you preach when it comes to building nature into your work days?
Yeah, so I go for walks most mornings. So I do my, morning walks where I'm going to my favorite little nook by the ocean, and I get that time in most days, rain or shine. Sometimes I don't always, but usually I do. On Fridays, if it's not pouring outside, I hook my hammock up and I will work outside in the forest. So Fridays are like my project day. It's my networking day. I work on different non-client facing work. And so I get to do that, which is one of my favorite things to do. And yeah, on my downtime too, like I'll go on retreats and I connect with like-minded people and do a lot of wilderness related stuff on my downtime. But throughout the week, those are some things that I incorporate. And like I mentioned before, like I'll listen to nature soundscapes or things like that, little things to kind of have a consistency with that. And also the practice what you preach piece. There's also this idea that, I think a lot of the time we see nature as this thing that's separate from us, or that it's a commodity to kind of fulfill us and make us feel good. Like, it reduces our stress hormones and we see it as something that's beneficial. But the next level is kind of understanding the reciprocity and like, how do I give back to nature and developing that sort of deeper relationship with nature? And maybe to some people that sounds maybe a little hippy dippy, but it's actually, if we go far back enough, we're all connected to some earth-based culture. Robin Kimmerer, who's this author, she wrote Braiding Sweetgrass and a few other books. Maybe you've heard of her, but she talks about this idea of, a very, very long time ago, it was like human nature to speak in terms of nature. Like there was some kind of, like the language people spoke, they understood how to identify different natural items, and they knew how to connect with nature on a deeper level. And so that language, I think, is still missing today, and people don't really understand maybe how nature develops and evolves and things like that. So I think what I'm getting to is this idea of connecting with nature, but understanding it, learning about it. And so that's something that I like to do. I like to learn about, different species and read about, the science behind it, but also kind of like Philip was saying, that intuitive connection. And so things like developing a relationship with, the ocean and the trees and even asking permission to like hook up my hammock sometimes and like having a conversation. I know it sounds a little crazy, but having that relationship can look different for everybody, but there is something very basic about it, but very natural. And so these are things that I like to implement.
And that reminds me of the Indigenous peoples. They talk to nature and ask permission to build on nature. And that reminds me very much of our Indigenous friends, Laura.
This idea of giving back, when I was talking about like reciprocity and that sort of Indigenous way of deep relationship with nature, one of the things that Robin Kimmerer suggests is gratitude. And that's a way of giving back, and just having that gratitude for nature. It creates space for reciprocity when there's that like gratitude that's been manifested. So that's what I wanted to add.
Beautiful. And when you're out in the forest with your hammock, do you have a desk that you somehow work on? Because I wanted to mention the not a desk is something still on my list. But what do you use, Laura?
I use my lap. It's not the most ergonomic, but you were the one who told me about Not a Desk, and I'm considering maybe getting it.
So a shout out to Not a Desk on the podcast. I'll be reaching out to you to see if we can get more of your desks to Canada. Let's hear from you, Philip. How do you practice what you preach and build nature into your days?
First of all, I think it's very important to be in the right places. Yeah, and I'm privileged that over time I've been able to select a couple of places which are fantastic. First of all, my primary home is in Belgium, nearby the medieval town of Bruges. It's just 10 miles from the coast. That's fantastic. And actually, the work home, which I built a year ago, is close to the oldest European canal. Yeah. So the second thing is I have my second home where my family lives in Austin, Texas, and that's an apartment which is downtown Austin on the Colorado River. There's 2 Colorado rivers in the United States, by the way, and I'm at the Town Lake Trail, which is absolutely gorgeous. That's a 11-mile thing, which in the morning when I'm there, I'm always doing with my cycle as soon as light is up. And then I have a vacation place in the Austrian Alps in Steiermark. And that's the place where I wrote my Smarter Working Manifesto back 10 years ago, because that gave me, actually the name of the chalet is called Nature at Work, right? It's a place where nature allows me to be at my best, and I give it back to the extent I can. So the second part, and by the way, there is a company called Nature Quant, which is giving a nature score to any kind of GPS location in the world. So you can have a score about what it is. Yeah. Then the second thing that they're measuring is nature dose. That's the extent to which you take the opportunity given to you by the place and whatever you did in biophilic design. Yeah. And therefore, I have 2 ways of dealing with that. It's the habit part. There is the Ozadi habits, yeah, which are the nature habits, which are relating to 3 things. Number 1, absolutely take mid-morning and mid-afternoon at least a half an hour break, right, to make sure that you energize again. The second thing is, when you then go to work, integrate nature into whatever you are doing, right? That means, for instance, going for a walking and talking meeting, and I call that a weeting. I mean, we all know about tweeting, drop the T, and weeting is what this is all about. We have Martine de Vaan, which is the head of innovation and government properties in the Netherlands, has written a book, extremely detailed, about what are the different types of business activities that you can do and how walking can be integrated into it. Fascinating. She's at long last deciding to put that into English because a lot of people would want to know about that. Then there is also beyond work, right? I love gardening. I love walking, cycling, canoeing. And then every weekend, every kind of quarter, I take a special excursion, not necessarily an expedition, to beautiful places. And by the way, that can be as much nearby nature as the exotic destinations that we have in mind. Yeah. And then in terms of work rituals, you know this, Laura, I have 4 rituals which have to do with work. There is authoring, which is doing your personal work. There is sharing and presenting, as we are currently doing at this moment, and then interacting or collaborating. And last but not least, there is energizing. And for each of those activities, there is a set of rituals that allow for well-being aspects and essentials and nature to be coming in. And last but not least, from a space point of view, I think it's very important that you bring in essentials into your work environment. Let me tell you, there's 2 things I have in my work home here. There's first of all the biophilic sounds, courtesy Mood Sonic. And Mood Sonic is a company founded by Julian Treasure, which I call the Pope of Sound. He's written the book Sound Business. And he says that what we all need is more water, wind, and birds. And he has basically sampled and recorded 24 kind of beautiful places ranging from New Zealand, Australia, Canada, I think too. And that's like a stream that is being produced, which is fantastic. My wife, Rosemary, loves it, particularly overnight, because she is suffering from tinnitus, and silence for her is absolutely not fun. And she says, how come we have in your work home biophilic sounds, but we don't have it in our primary residence? Last but not least, I also have, I'm using a series of fragrances, courtesy a company called Aera, which has a solution. It's almost like a bit of I would say a mobile device that you plug in and it has cassettes with fragrances in it. And they have identified, for the purpose of my business, 5, I would say, fragrances that are ideal for sharing, energizing, and things like that. So in that way, you basically bring the whole fragrance aspect from nature inside, which is very good. So that's how I put the habits and the rituals into place for nature.
Wow, that is so inspiring. And I can't wait to see your property in Bruges when I'm out there next month with my family in July. And we're going to film a podcast in an apartment that Philip created with his son to depict an ideal work and living arrangement, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Countdown 4 weeks.
Yeah. So keep watching the podcast to see that. Now, Philip has shared several books and he's always a curator of knowledge, which I really appreciate. Laura, do you have a book or a podcast that you want to share beyond what you mentioned earlier?
There's 3 books that I love to talk about. There's one called Hello, Goodbye. It's a book on ritual. So Philip was just talking about it, and it's in partnership with nature. It's basically like a cookbook. And it's 75 rituals for times of loss, change, celebration, and transition. So it's this idea that it's secular, but rituals to incorporate into your life outside or with natural elements. And I think that's something that our culture tends to need, is like marking the transition, externalizing any kind of change, whether it's like losing a job or losing a friendship or moving into a new home or naming a baby. It could be literally anything. And you open it up and there's like reflective questions and things like that. And the summer solstice is coming up this Wednesday. So I'll be gathering with some friends and doing a summer ritual. So that's a good one to have. And another book is called Soul Craft by Bill Plotkin, which I've been recommending to a lot of people. He's a depth psychologist based out of Colorado. And he basically, in this book, it's crossing into the mysteries of nature and psyche. It's basically like a roadmap for soul searching using like Jungian psychology, depth psychology, and his wilderness experience in terms of like how to go into yourself and how to find your purpose and connect with that more than human world. So it's a really great book if you're into that sort of intuitive exploration and he talks about shadow work and fasting and things like that. So the last one is an article. Actually, if you don't have time for a book, there's a really great 7-page article by Robin Kimmerer. She's the Indigenous author. She wrote an article called Returning the Gift, which you can find on Google Scholar, or you can find it online. And basically she just talks about the gift of nature and like that more than human world and how to develop that relationship with nature and just a very beautiful perspective on this nature connection. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So my 2 final questions that I ask all guests in our final couple of minutes here. Number 1, if you didn't need to sleep and you could use that time to do whatever else you wanted to do, what would it be? We'll start with Philip.
Well, actually, at this very moment, I would like to have more time to go and have meetings with my grandchildren, Pearson and Vivian, in Austin, Texas, or actually over here when they come over in a couple of weeks, because there is so much that I would love to share with them that they don't need to necessarily digest and curate anymore. But also, I would like to listen to them, because I have a feeling that they are educated in a very nice school, and that there's a lot that they can impart on me. So that's for me.
Wonderful. On to you, Laura. What would you do if you didn't need to sleep?
I would say I'd probably chase the summers and travel to anywhere that it's warm and learn how to like live off the land. Probably I haven't mustered up the courage yet to camp alone, but I'd probably just spend as much time as I could outside and read as many books as I can. I just have so many books I haven't read that I just don't have enough time to read.
No kidding. As you can see, I'm a book addict as well, with a lack of time to read them all. My final question is, if you could have one wish for a better world when it comes to nature, what would it be? We'll start with you, Laura.
Going back to what I was saying before, like being able to connect with nature on like a deeper level and seeing the benefits of it and not seeing nature as separate. And maybe one day we can all start to incorporate nature into our work life. And maybe even I would love to see, more industries and fields have like an outdoor version of a job. That would be really cool.
That would be magnificent. What about you, Philip? Your wish?
Yeah, my wish is that leadership of all kinds, people leadership especially, that is embracing human dimensions, even well beyond biophilia, to a much larger extent in job and workspace design. Frankly, it's pathetic, the kind of places that people are working in. That ranges not just into commercial environments, but also into some of the residences that they have. I mean, here in Belgium, we're just going through a thunderstorm at this very moment. And there's a majority of people here don't have any air conditioning. So having temperatures rise to 25 plus Celsius is not unusual. And it makes people just completely incapable to do that kind of stuff. So a lot of things to do in job and workspace design to give people the basics of comfort that they need before we start thinking about the higher order well-being.
Isn't that the truth? Well, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I really appreciated both of your different perspectives. But what struck me is I think a lot of what you're sharing is similar. There's a lot of overlap.
Well, there is also an institute that I would like to recommend. It's called the International Living Future Institute, which is doing a marvelous job. And then there's Nature Quant organization, which is based in Oregon, which is also, you guys are in close proximity to some of the authorities in this field.
Wonderful. Well, we are feeling lucky to live in Canada with so much abundance in nature here. And again, really appreciate both of you. I hope this is the beginning of a friendship and collaboration between the two of you as well. So thank you again for being here. And I look forward to launching this episode and the blog associated with it, and to doing the episode in Bruges this summer with you, Philip. So thank you very much, and stay well. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Where Work Meets Life. If you enjoyed this content, please rate and review the podcast, as that helps me get it out to more people. Visit my website at drlaura.live and sign up for my monthly e-newsletter full of tips and resources. Please engage with us on social media and check out the podcast summary for links to my psychology practices, Canada Career Counselling, Calgary Career Counselling, and Synthesis Psychology. Stay well.